Okay, good evening everyone. Thanks for coming out on this cold night to our candidate information evening. It's officially 110 days to the election, which would have been great if it was 101 days, but sadly it's not. On my right here is Anthony Morton. He's the electoral officer from elections.com. And to my left is Nigel Traynor, who's the chief executive. So if I say anything stupid, he will jump in. What I'm going to give you is TDC 101. It's a really, really high-level view of what's involved in being a Timaru District Councillor, about the council, some of the tasks you'll be asked to do if you're successful as a councillor, and hopefully we won't put you off running. So, who's the district? 47,547 people in a district stretching from Mesopotamia right up in the panhandle of the district down to Pariora, and 21,429 houses working across 5,883 businesses. The council will look after 1,700 k's of roads, 176 bridges, $40 million worth of street furniture, which is like benches and that sort of things, 345 k's of sewer pipes, drinking water, 3 swimming pools, 1 dog pound, etc., etc. Council meets in this room. It's 9 council members and 1 mayor. It usually meets on a Tuesday every single month. Standing committees every 6 weeks or so, but they can call extra meetings and workshops when required. During COVID, you didn't have to be in the room, but they got rid of that rule, so we need to have the right number of people in the room to form a quorum, because online doesn't count anymore, but 1 or 2 members can come in online if they have to. And all meetings now are live streamed via the Eye in the Sky up here and broadcast out to the world, so everyone knows what you look like. One thing they probably don't tell you before starting is there is a lot of reading. Agendas are sent out electronically every every Wednesday or Thursday before the meeting. Staff coming up to talk to you will say, we'll take the report as read, which is suggesting that you've read the report. It's a good thing to do, is usually voting on it, but it's really complex stuff, so never be worried about asking staff questions. They're there at the end of the day to help. In your term, there's one big thing you have to get right, and that's the long-term plan. But halfway through your triennium, just as you're beginning to be comfortable with a councillor, they'll ask you to do this report, which sets out the next 10 years of spending across the district, so no small feat. So this sets out council spending commitments, budgets, and all the things you want to deliver over the next 10 years, and it's the chance for you to really put your stamp on council work. There's a big amount of work going into this, and for a lot of new councillors, they do find it quite a rush to get to this point. So if there's one thing that you need to focus on, it's this right in the middle of your term. Coming out of that, at the moment, we've got 3 big projects underway that you'll probably know about. That's the Theatre Royal Museum, our Rangi Stadium development, and the Timaru Urban Water Treatment upgrades up at Claremont. These are all set to be delivered over the course of the next 3 years, so if you are successful as a councillor, this will be getting delivered on your watch. But also, locally, and then nationally, we're looking at 3 big reforms that are going to massively change how councils deliver stuff. There's a delivery of the 3 water service. We're currently looking at that at the moment. The councillors' preferred option is for water services to be removed from the direct control of council and sent out to a separate company in collaboration with their neighbours. That will mean that councillors around the table will no longer be making day-to-day decisions on water services, and at some point in the future they'll be sending their own bills and that sort of thing, so it will quite fundamentally change what the council is all about. And then also coming from Wellington are quite significant changes to the Resource Management Act and building consent services. They are wanting to rip up the RMA that our planning departments have been working with for years and bring something new in. They're looking at more regionalisation of plans. And they're taking a similar view with building consent services, so being more permissive of private companies to consent their own work if they have insurance, looking at private consenting agencies and looking at more regionalisation for things. And fresh out of the gate, the last couple of weeks, we're also talking about council scorecards and rates capping. They will be league tables of where your rates are sitting at. They may be government mandated levels of how high you're allowed to put rates up. So that's going to quite fundamentally change the decisions that you make around this table. Challenges. So or opportunities, as some people call them. The biggest challenge we've got at the moment is ensuring affordability while meeting community expectations. Councils always get judged against the CPI, which is basically what your shopping basket costs, but the stuff we buy is quite different, and it's had quite significant increases in price over the last while. So that's why you'll have found that council rates increases have been overstripping inflation for the last wee while. But there's a general feel around the council table and around the country that we're losing our social licence to do that, so there's going to be a lot of pressure to try and keep a cap on things. But at the same time, the council is trying to close our operational deficit. That's how much we spend on day-to-day projects, such as maintaining roads, fixing bridges, filling potholes and that sort of thing. At the moment, we are spending more than we are bringing in, and that's leading to a deficit that we need to close. Closing that deficit is vital so we can start repaying debt. At the moment, council debt is rising as we continue to invest in new facilities. And then replacing ageing infrastructure. Much like myself, things in the district are getting older. I'm the exact same age as the library, I found out. And we need to dig them up and replace them before they explode so we don't end up like Wellington with punamis running down the street and various impromptu fountains. And then behind all this, we've got changing government priorities. A good example of this is that after all our plans had been published, NZTA completely changed focus of how roading funding was done. And now there's lots of money for potholes, but there's no longer any money for rural bridges. So we've had to move our priorities to match that or fill in the gap with our own money. Bit of background reading is useful if you want to come in as a well-informed candidate. As I said, the long-term plan before, that sets out what our current crop of councillors have said they'll do over the next 10 years. It gets refreshed every 3 years, but this is the most latest one. The annual report is a good review of how we did in the last year. It has all the financial information, but it also has measures of how our services performed against the targets that were set. From mid-July, we'll be putting out our new annual plan, which talks about year 2 of the long-term plan. And basically, the premise of that is it takes the long-term plan and says what's changed in the last year and what do we need to do. And then from mid-July, we've got the pre-election report coming out. This is Nigel Trainor's warts and all review of the organisation that is entirely free of political influence. And it's him sort of saying what's right with the organisation, what's wrong with the organisation, and what sort of financial state we're in. So it's pretty vital reading if you want to be a good candidate, and it brings you into the election process. Pretty knowledgeable. And I could probably hand over to Anthony then. Oh. Would you click it?
Well, kia ora koutou everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming along on a Monday night after a long weekend. It's a bit of a challenge usually to get people to come along to these events on a Monday, full stop, but after a long weekend, particularly challenging. But anyway, as Stephen has said, I'm Anthony Morton. I'm the electoral officer for Timaru District Council for 2025, and continuing from Mark Lowe, who was here previously. So Stephen's taken you through briefly what the council setup is and what their challenges are in front of them, how they operate. So I'm going to take you through the election process and what you need to do to be considered as a candidate, if that's what you want to do, and the various processes that fall beyond that, such as campaigning and the election stuff as well. So what I'm going to do is I've got a couple of dozen-ish slides here to work through. Quite heavy going, sadly, in terms of the number of bullet points, because there's a reasonable amount of material to cover off there. But what I'll do is I'll just put them up there. You can test your speed reading skills by seeing if you can whiz through some of those bullet points, but I'll follow through with a bit of a summary as to what I really want you to take away from that. Slides are available, the presentation is available afterwards, and obviously this is being recorded, so there's plenty of opportunities to come back to us if you've got any questions. But even through the course of my presentation, if you've got anything that jumps out at you that I haven't covered off, throw your hand up and we'll see if we can cover that off while we're in that particular process. So, where do I fit in? I'm employed by elections.com. We're a small company based in Christchurch that does election management stuff. And we keep ourselves fairly busy in any given year anyway. We're typically chewing on about a couple of hundred elections for private organisations. So a lot of them are reasonably small, but we'll also be doing national election processes. So we've got an election process underway, for instance, for farmlands at the moment. There's some FMG, Fonterra, those sort of organisations that typically don't need company office processes to support their election requirements. We also do a lot of elections for iwi and some union type stuff as well. So I'm employed by them. I'm based in Christchurch, and we, for the 2025 elections, have been contracted by 47 different councils to run their elections for them, Timaru being one of them. And if you look down the bottom of that slide, the top block of that bottom piece is the city and district councils that have engaged us. The bottom row is the regional councils. So in my case, I'm electoral officer for 17 councils, most of Canterbury and Otago and Southland for that matter. So all of mine are based in the South Island, happily. My colleague, Warwick Lamp, who I'll introduce you to shortly, he does the other 27, and his is predominantly North Island, but he's also picked up recently Christchurch and a few others in the South Island. So in terms of the electoral team this time round, that's me at the top, and then supported by Stephen and Brendan to my left, your right. So Stephen and Brendan will be your front of house people here that you're dealing with when you're submitting nomination forms, for instance, or have other in-house queries. They can help you out at that level. And obviously me being in Christchurch, they'll escalate anything to me if I need to jump on board and have a look at anything that they can't handle. But I've listed down the bottom there my colleague Warwick Lamp. He's not here tonight and he won't be on this particular presentation, but if you continue as a candidate, you will hear from Warwick. He will send out emails to all our council candidates. So after nominations close, you could expect to get several emails from him, just giving you some guidance on what the next expected steps are and a few things to look out for, etc. In terms of electoral officer role, I'm in charge of it basically. This is where the buck stops. So if anybody grizzles, that's who they come back to. Object is really to just provide a level playing field, firstly for the candidates and then ultimately for the electors. So give the candidates that want to stand the opportunity to stand, give the electors that want to vote opportunities to vote. That's what we're about principally. We put the big thing up at the bottom there in red letters, basically to make you aware that we don't have a lot of levers within that legislation to control the campaigning phase of elections, which is a bit ironic because that's generally what everybody's interested in. So we don't get involved in any refereeing to any great extent. We are only available to make out or to address issues with false advertising, particularly involving a copy of a voting paper, and if somebody hasn't put authorisation statements on their material, which I'll show you in a later slide. All right, election timetable. So if you've been through the election process before, this will be vaguely familiar to you, but there has been one reasonably major change this time around. So the election day is still the 11th of October, which is the second Saturday in October. What the politicians did last time is finally listened to the councils and extended the voting period. So we've now gone from a fairly miserable 22 and a half days to 32 and a half days, smidgen better, but the whole process has generally been compressed at the front end to bring in that extra 10 days in the voting period. So the things like your nomination period, for instance, has been squeezed 10-ish days. So in terms of that particular timetable, what I want you to just take notice of particularly is that close of nomination date. So it's now 1st of August. If you want to be a candidate, that's when you've got to get your paperwork into us for a start off. Everything else beyond that will come into its own play, but that voting period then starts on the 9th of September, which is when the voter packs go out, and then the electors have got 32 and a half days to mark their papers and get them back to us. Results, we'll go through all those dates in a bit more detail shortly, but they will flow from the 12th or the 11th of October, beg your pardon. All right, any questions on that part up to there? Anything that looked a bit unusual? All right. So, as electoral officer, I will be calling for some nominations to fill these particular vacancies later this month. In fact, early next month, that nomination call goes out officially. But council will start ramping up their comms, basically saying through social media and public notices and media releases, etc., that these particular vacancies are available for nomination. The bottom one, I've thrown that in there just because I'm also the returning officer or the electoral officer for Environment Canterbury. So within the South Canterbury area, Timaru District Council area in particular, those are the vacancies that are up for filling or to be filled by nomination by the 1st of August, effectively. All right. So I thought I'd just take you through this in a little bit more detail. So this is some cans and can'ts that you can do and can't do for nomination process. Most of them are reasonably obvious. Hopefully the first one is. So you can't stand if you're in prison. And you can't stand for both Timaru District Council positions and Environment Canterbury if you wanted to. You could stand for another regional council if you really wanted to, but just bear that in mind. And principally, you can't have an interest in a contract with either the council or if you were thinking of standing for the licensing trust with the Geraldine Licensing Trust of more than $25,000 a year. There is some wiggle room to get out of that if you have got a contract with that, but refer to the candidate handbook if you're in that position. There's some contact details there to get in touch with the audit office, and they'll work you through whether you can or whether you would be restricted by whatever contract you've currently got yourself into. And the last point there, you can't nominate yourself. You need two other people to nominate you, and they must be enrolled in the area that you want to stand for. But again, we'll show you a bit more detail about that shortly. The other positions or the other points there, you don't have to live within the area that you want to stand for. So you can live, as the candidate, you can live effectively anywhere for Timaru District Council positions. That's not the case for the Geraldine Licensing Trust. So just keep that in mind. You can nominate yourself or be nominated rather for multiple positions across the council if you want to. And again, we'll go through that in more detail later. But you must be a New Zealand citizen and you must be on an electoral roll somewhere. We will go through that process when we're checking your nomination form to make sure that you are touching all those eligibility points. The last point there, that you can't withdraw after nominations close, it's not quite right. You can actually withdraw, but only for medical reasons. And it gets way harder once we go past that 1st of August date. So up to the 1st of August, it's reasonably straightforward. If you've got a change of mind or a change of circumstances, you just come back to me and say, something's changed, I don't want to continue. I'll send you a form to fill in and you do that. It's reasonably straightforward. Once we go past that 1st of August date, it gets way harder. You have to get a medical certificate. It has to be witnessed by a JP or a solicitor. Somebody else has to sign it as well. And it's just not an automatic process thereafter. So just keep that in mind. In terms of what you need to do, so the nominations themselves open on the 4th of July and they close on the 1st of August, and that deadline is solid. We can't wiggle past that, sadly. But if you're wanting to stand as a candidate, that's your starting point. You need to submit a nomination form. You have to pay $200 for every position that you want to stand for. and you have to provide that evidence of your citizenship. And if you want to, submit a profile statement and a photo, and I'll come to those in a bit more detail shortly. In terms of where you can get those forms, have we got any here tonight? Not yet? Not yet. They'll be on the website shortly, by the end of the month, in theory. You can go into the council office and pick some up if you want hard copies, or download them from the website when they're available from there, or we can email them out to you, and again, you can print them off yourself. But they need to be completed on those official nomination forms. That deposit needs to be paid at the time, so you need to submit some evidence that that's been paid. And just to be aware that your contact details from when your nomination is confirmed will be made available on the council's website. And we'll go through that in a wee bit more detail shortly. I'm not going to go through that in any great detail because the scale probably doesn't allow it, but that's just an example of a nomination form. And I really just want to point out it's 2 pages. The front page is available for public inspection, so just keep that in mind. It always has been, it's nothing new, but and that's where typically the candidate details are picked up from for listing on the website. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly work through that. It's got 3 sections on that front page. In this case, it's an example of a candidate or a nomination form for the position of mayor. And in section A there, it's asking you to confirm whether you live within the Timaru District Council area or without. If you got down to a ward level, it would be asking you, do you live within that ward you wanted to stand for or without? And likewise with the community board or the licensing trust, you'd have to specify that. Section B is the candidate details, so that's your name and your phone number and email address. And included in there is some little sections for the name you want listed on the voting paper for you. So if you don't want your full name, you might be known locally as some other name, there's a little block in there for you to list that. And also there's a block in there for an affiliation. And I'll show you where these particular areas come out in the wash shortly. But obviously there's a signature and a date block. We want you to sign the form and date it. And then below that in that section C is where your 2 nominators fill in their details. On the back page, we have moved one item onto the back page this time round because of the privacy things that have arisen in previous elections. So on the back page is the candidate's address. That's not going to be made publicly available. And likewise, if you don't want to list any details on the front for making available to the public, and we strongly suggest you do make contact details made available to the public, but if you don't, we, as the electoral team, want to know how to get hold of you. So we want your phone number and or email at least on that back page. Okay, but anything on the back page is not publicly available. That's just for our purposes to check your nomination eligibility. All right, in terms of those candidate profiles and photos, so they're optional. You don't have to put one in, but most candidates do. And I'll show you shortly where they come out in the wash if you haven't been through that election process before. But we do want them electronically so that we can copy and paste that content out of what you provide. So we don't want to have to retype your profile, because if we retype, that's when errors come in and you as candidates don't get a lot of opportunity to see that. So I'll show you shortly where that comes out. Can't be more than 150 words. That's just for this little profile that goes in the booklet. Your own campaign material, you can stick whatever amount of words you want in there yourself. But we do ask you to keep to the paragraph format, so no bullet points, no underlining, no italics, no bolding, all those sort of things. Just keep in mind that those profiles go into a little booklet. There's typically lots of little profiles in that booklet, and there's printing pressure, space pressure on us. So hence the bullet point thing, that's basically just a space issue. But if you do submit something that's got bullet points, as you'll see in the candidate handbook when you check it out, they'll just get swapped out ultimately, and it'll get semicoloned and won't look as effective as if you had done it as a paragraph format originally. Within that little profile that goes in the booklet, you can't comment on other people's policies in that particular document. As again, you can comment what you like on your own campaigning material, but within that little booklet, you can't comment on anybody else's policies. So stick to your own knitting, and we don't get to verify that in any great degree. And there's a disclaimer in that booklet saying that the electoral officer is not responsible for what he's been given. So you need to check that what you're supplying is valid and factual, basically. Those profiles will be put on the council's website probably about a fortnight to 3 weeks after that nomination period closed. So there's a little process that goes through with the printer, getting all those documents lined up and ready to go. When we've signed off TDC's booklet, then those profiles will get released for listing on the website. The photos as well, they will get put up at the same time. They're part of that profile. But if you're submitting a photo, just make sure it's taken within the last 12 months. So it needs to be current. We suggest that they are in colour because it usually comes out better in the little booklet in colour. You can opt to have a black and white one if you want to. There's a point of difference. But just make sure they're of yourself, not you as a family group or sports group or something, and you're third from the left. So we'll take those photos, we'll crop them to whatever format we need to meet that printer's requirement. So they don't have to be a portrait photo or anything like that, a studio photo, but reasonably high resolution, please. So don't just do a screen grab off your Facebook page, just give us a 2 or 3 meg file is ideal, and we can pick that up and crop and sort it out as need be. Bottom point there, if you're going to take a photo, we suggest you take it inside against a light coloured background. It just minimises the shadow and that sort of thing, but not a window. Any questions on that bit so far?
The profile, would that be a mnemonic form or a capital first letter form if you're writing continuously?
Yeah, certainly ordinary sentence, so it's just plain text is a suggestion. So we'll take it. Our objective is to make sure we don't confuse the candidates. So if we think it's going to, that whatever format you submitted is going to cause confusion, we'll come back to you. But if you have a look at previous, and we'll show you, oh no, actually the next one doesn't have that in there, but we can give you previous versions if you want to have a look at it. Here's an example of how it comes out in the little booklet. So photos and the profiles have been provided separately. This boy, for instance, is Warwick, who I was telling you about before. It's an old photo. He doesn't look quite so flash as that these days, but in this case we've conjured up a profile for him to stand for Waitaki District Council. So all of that information there is picked up from the nomination form, not from the profile itself. So the profile in this case would follow below that where that says a 150-word candidate profile text.
Just something useful for the other candidates. If you look at that picture, I'm a professional photographer, and that would show black and white because his face is quite dark. So don't take a photo like that.
Yeah, good point. The booklets, the photos in the booklets are colour these days, so there is a little bit more scope, a little bit more flexibility, but in this case, yeah, that's an old photo.
And it's going to be tiny.
Yes, it is going to be small. So they're a little DLE sized booklet, this big to about that high, so not particularly big, just keep that in mind. But in this case, he's claimed an affiliation, which is the little tagline below his surname, his name there. And in his case, that's a play on his surname, so he thinks he's been clever. Historically, that was things like independent, or if you were standing for a political party, a recognised political party, would be something like that, the Labour Party or the Greens Party, National Party, those sort of things. If you're standing for a formal group like that and you want to claim that affiliation, you also need to apply or supply authorisation from that group to say you've got approval to have that name listed as your affiliation. And in his case, he's standing for another position, so that's listed there. He was standing for all three positions within Timaru District Council, so Mayor, Councillor and Community Board in Geraldine or one of the Community Board areas. They would all be listed there, and then your profile would flow below that. Just before we go into this part, is there anything that anybody's got any questions on so far on that first part?
So if you are standing for mayor and standing for ward councillor, do you pay twice or you just pay once?
No, sadly, every position you stand for has that $200 fee. That's technically, well, it's a nomination deposit. You'll get that back under three circumstances. One, if you're elected. Two, if you're withdrawn or you withdraw. And the third is if you are unsuccessful as a candidate, but you get within 25% of the votes of the lowest polling successful candidate, you'll get that deposit back. So in most cases, you'll get the deposit back, but it is $200 for each position you want to apply for. All right, on to campaigning. Now, we've put this slide in here. It's not technically it's not really relevant to campaigning, although this is where it comes out into play more, but it's just making you aware of the need to, in some cases, keep yourself safe. And it generally presents itself around the campaigning period and typically on social media. But just what we're doing as a general process is making this part of the presentation to keep your mind full of the fact that people might pick on you during that campaigning period. If you think your particular campaign style or whatever you're going to campaign on may attract some negative feedback, have a further look at this, have a better look at this, because there's some tips in there about how you may want to structure your nomination process, such as organise a separate phone number or a separate email account or a separate Facebook account if that's what you're going to use from your normal home private accounts. So there's more information in the handbook. Again, all we're doing is drawing your attention to this at this point. I think the pertinent point there is the last bullet point, which if you feel threatened at any point, your first port of call is to the police, and they will work you through that process. These other items are really just suggestions for how you might want to structure your campaign. All right, so if you want to be a candidate, you can do some campaigning. Most candidates will do something. They'll usually at least tell their neighbours that they're standing and encourage them to vote for them. But that can start at any time, so lots of people around the country are campaigning now before the nomination period is actually kicked off. That's fine, they can do that. But what you need to bear in mind is that any campaigning that you do, any costs you incur are your costs as the candidate, or you may be able to offset that if you are lucky enough to pick up some donations, which we'll cover off in a slide shortly. But if you're going to go do campaigning, then you have to keep away from council's resources, and the main ones to keep away from are their logos and areas like this, the council chamber. So you can't come into the council chamber with t-shirt on saying vote for me or your megaphone or whatever you want to do. And their social media channels is the other thing that most councils will want you to keep off. In fact, all councils will. As candidates, any campaign cost you do incur has to be recorded, and you need to declare that in a declaration at the end of the period, and we'll go through that again in a little bit more detail. What I have to get excited about, and I hate the thought of it, but your campaign material, any campaign material, has to have an authorisation statement on it. And I'll show you one of those shortly. But it's a statement saying who has authorised this particular campaign material. So it's either going to be you as a candidate or your agent. And historically, that also then had to be followed by a physical contact address. That's now changed, so you can list things like your phone number or your agent's phone number or their email address, those sort of things. And that's probably about half of what I spend my electoral officer role as, sorting out candidates that haven't done that on their campaign material. As I noted earlier, there's not a lot of levers that we can pull as electoral officers to control the campaigning space, so a lot of it is self-controlled. But just be mindful that whatever you say is still open to the laws of defamation, so you can't say anything. You need to be aware that somebody could turn around and sue you if you're saying incorrect things.
This is not the date for the last election, was the date you couldn't put billboards up for a certain.
Yeah.
So council's signage policy is that we can't put up physical billboards more than 6 weeks prior to the election, and they need to be down within 1 week after the election. So for this year, it can be erected from Friday the 30th of August, and has to be down by midnight Saturday the 18th of October. 7-week window there for physical billboards.
Yeah. So those are just this roadside signs and the like. So your posters, etc., you can stick them up whenever you like if you want to, so long as it's got that authorisation statement on. But bear in mind those signage rules are council to council. So Timaru's is what Brendan's just given you. Ashburton will have a different set of rules. Waimate will be different again. So particularly if you're in the regional council space, if you're thinking of standing for the regional council, you need to be mindful of those varying dates. But in Timaru's case, when does that have to come down?
1 week.
Yeah, that's very generous. Lots of the councils require it down either before voting closes or the day it closes. All right, so in terms of expenditure limits, if you are going to do some campaigning and you're going to spend money, that's your maximum you can spend. Most people won't get to that limit, but just need to be mindful. These are all population-based, so hence the smaller value for Pleasant Point Community Board, for instance. But again, if you are going to spend some money, it's coming out of your pocket for a start off. There's no magical pot at the end of the process that says, here, have some money back, sadly. If you're standing for multiple positions, then the higher limit applies, not a sum of those positions. So just keep that one in mind too. All right, so in the handbook there'll be more information about this in there, but this time round with that shuffle of the election dates, there's a bit of an anomaly in the first date that's up there, the highlighted date of the 11th of July. So historically, that period always used to coincide with the opening of nominations, but now with this shuffle, there's this wrinkle in the process now where technically you don't have to declare any expenses that happen until the 11th of July unless the value of that spend continues into that nomination period or the election period. So some examples of that would be if you, for instance, put some ads into a daily newspaper before the 11th of July, the expected life of that particular publication is 1 day because that's when the next publication comes out. So it's deemed that if you've stuck something into a daily newspaper, for instance, before that 11th of July, you don't have to account for that. If you stuck it into a quarterly magazine, but for example, say a farming magazine or something, the shelf life of that would be the time until the next publication came out. So you may have to do some apportionment of those sort of costs. And that's where that second point is indicating that in some cases you may spend some money well in advance of that. You may get a website set up, for instance, and you may get some flash photos taken. You may pay for that in February, but if that website's still operational until October, which in theory it would be, you'll need to apportion that cost that you paid in February and bring in the value of that sits between the 11th of July and the 11th of October. So just keep that in mind. At the end of the period, we also need you to complete this declaration. And we send you the form, and that requires you to list any expenses that you spent within that 3-month, 11th of July to 11th of October period, plus those other areas that you may have brought some apportionment in for. If you don't spend anything, we need you to still to sign a declaration saying you didn't spend anything. And those declarations go up on the council's website, and they're there for 7 years. So we don't need the invoices or your receipts back with those declarations, we just want the declaration itself. But you hang on to the receipts and the invoices, and you need to be prepared to furnish those if anybody challenges your particular declaration. And certainly in the bigger areas, that's not uncommon. So the declaration is your declaration of how much you've spent. Should be below that expenditure limit for whatever you're standing for. And if somebody then doesn't believe what you've listed, they'll come back to us and challenge me or ask me to check it. I'll go back to you and say, is this right? If you don't change your declaration and the person still says, I think this is wrong, goes off to the police and they follow it up. And that's where that deposit, if you're due for your deposit back, you don't get it back until we get that declaration back from you. So it's a bit of post-election requirement. We go through that with all the candidates just to get those declarations back in and up on the website. Donations, probably not so much of an issue in the provincial council areas, but if you do get some donations, in some cases you have to include those in your declaration. Principally, any money that you get donated of more than $1,500 has to be declared, and the object is they want to know who has funded your campaign, basically. So there's no time period for when those donations apply. So if somebody gave you a donation last year for your campaign and it's over $1,500, you need to bring it in, show that on your declaration. There's some things to be aware of there. So occasionally some people will donate you some items or give you something at a reduced rate. If the value of that is up to more than $1,500, again, that needs to be declared as part of that declaration process. So it's not necessarily just money, sometimes it can be in the way of goods and services. You can't say that you don't know who that money has come from unless you truly don't know who it's come from. And the opportunities for that these days with electronic bank transfers, etc., are fairly limited. So those are the sort of areas where the police will get interested in a particular declaration if somebody challenges it. And if you get somebody that wants to donate you little chunks of donations to try and avoid the I don't want my name declared, and you know it's from that same party and it adds up to more than $1,500, you have to declare it. So they can't dribble it to you effectively. Those are what's known as donations by contribution. So have a look in the handbook. There's more information in there. As I say, it's usually not so much as a factor for provincial councils. It's usually the big city guys that have got the political parties behind them. But you may get some donations that you may need to account for. All right, so those election signages, this is what we were talking about before from Brendan's side of things. Those are the dates they go up. There's specific details in the handbook about signage size and lettering size and all that sort of thing. So if you're thinking of doing this, check that handbook out first. My interest in it, by default, is has it got an authorisation statement on it somewhere? And if it hasn't, then I have to chase you up about that. If you are looking or thinking about putting it somewhere near a state highway, you need to be particularly careful about that, because NZTA have got fairly tough rules about how far away from the highway you can place it and things like that. What do I need to tell you there? Vehicle sign writing is probably the other thing to be aware of. I'm just not sure whether Stephen or Brendan are familiar with your particular requirements, but vehicle sign writing is another form of signage. So just be aware that that needs that authorisation statement on it and would be subject to those timeframes if you're parking that vehicle up somewhere. So if you're running around in it, it's probably not such an issue. I think, so here's some examples, a couple of examples of signage. The one on the right isn't good because it's got an imitation voting document in it. So I'd come back to you at that point and say that's not good. Happily, they've both got the authorisation statement on it down the bottom. So in this case, it's authorised by John Smith, who is supposedly Fred Dagg's agent. And in this case, it's the old version of the authorisation statement, which has a physical address there. No longer needs that physical address. Can be some other form of contact. If you look in the handbook, it's in there. But the expectation is that anybody wanting to talk to you about that sign or your candidacy can contact you or your agent at whatever address point you've listed. Another example of a sign, this is one where it's perhaps being a bit honest. So this guy didn't actually stand in the end. He put this up several elections ago. This is in Tauranga. Just put it up as a joke because he just wanted to see how much interest he would get. And he actually got, surprisingly, a lot of interest. Originally he didn't have an authorisation statement down the bottom, so we had to go back to him. He fixed that, and then he decided that he'd pull out. And this was before Tauranga then got, or the council got replaced by commissioners. But when he pulled out, he said to the electoral officer, I've got that much good feedback from a sign, I'm going to stand next time. But he then didn't get the opportunity because the commissioners came into play and he didn't get to stand again for another 2 elections. So, but just an example of what you can do. As I say, we get more excited about the authorisations. Not ourselves, but when people complain, we have to follow it up. These aren't advertising signs, but they are examples of where you can stick your voting papers back into. The one on the right, the orange bin, will get dressed up a bit. That's in its raw state at the moment, but it'll get some signage on it saying that it is a Timaru District Council bin, but don't stick your signage on those items, please. Social media, this is the theory, as I noted earlier, it's a council resource, it's a growing council resource, and they want to keep it neutral. So they'll use social media to promote the election. They don't want candidates sneaking in there saying vote for me, or other people posting information in there that includes some form of linkage to candidates. So this is, the bottom point effectively sums that up, that the council wants to keep that neutral, and the point that's highlighted is what they will do. So the council staff will monitor those social media channels, and if they see something that sniffs of electioneering, they'll dump it off there. Probably won't go back to you to ask permission or anything, it'll just be removed. And if they keep getting posts, etc., from the same party, then they'll block them. So that's the theory. This is the practice of how they'll police that effectively. But the message is basically stick to your own social media channels and you won't come to any problems with the council. This is usually for the people that are associated or sit on the sidelines that throw things on there that think will be helpful but aren't. Bottom point there is, again, it's something we get called on to sort out after voting documents get mailed out. So it's increasingly common now with social media for candidates in particular to put photos up of their completed voting papers. And we get challenged as soon as that happens because that's deemed to be potentially leading voters So as soon as you've got a legitimate voting paper up there showing how somebody has voted, that's grounds for potential challenge. So as soon as those photos, etc., go up on Facebook, we usually spend about the next 3 or 4 days chasing those candidates up to tell them to remove them. If you want to put something up along those lines to encourage people to vote, leave your voting paper in the envelope and stick a photo of your envelope up. Say, I've done mine, about to stick it in the bin, have you done yours? As long as it doesn't show a completed voting document. Election offences. So if you're going to campaign, you just need to be aware of the big ones. These are the big ones. As I said, that imitation voting document is usually a fairly common one. But the other main one is that item of treating. So as candidates, you can't give somebody something of financial value to encourage them to vote. And things like, menial little things like pens, notepads, something that's got a residual value can be used as a point of challenge against you. So we tell you, don't do them, basically. So don't give out T-shirts with "Vote for me" on them. Don't give out pens, those sort of things. All right. Over and above that, it's usually the unauthorised ads that we have to get involved in, that we will go back to candidates regularly on. There's more information in the handbook, pages and pages of it if you really want to get involved and have a look at the detail. It's also available online. All right, quick coverage of this. So electoral rolls, we produce 2 versions of the electoral roll. The first one is about to hit the deck from the 4th of July. That's the one we use for the nomination process. And then that's followed by another one about a month or so, 6 weeks later, that we use for the mail out of the voter packs. For your purposes, if you want to buy a copy of those, you can. In fact, anybody can, but we can only supply them to you in hard copy. So just keep that in mind. If you want a soft copy, you can go to the Electoral Commission and ask them to supply a file. Costs way more money, but it's then a case of waiting for them to supply that to you. We don't get involved in that process. They will come back to us and ask us, are you actually a candidate? And we'll confirm that if you are, and then it's up to them to release those files to you. But as candidates, particularly if you are in either the ward or the community board position, if you're looking to get nominated for that, that's usually the tripping point about your eligibility, is whether the people that are nominating you are actually enrolled for the position you want to stand for. And that's where a little bit of homework is good, where if you can pop into the council before you get them to fill in your nomination form and check that they are actually enrolled for the area that you want to stand for. So if you're standing for mayor, they just have to be on the Timaru District Council somewhere. If you're standing in the Timaru ward, they need to be in the Timaru ward, enrolled in the Timaru ward. And it's surprising how many people will ask the question of these people when they're filling in this paper, are you enrolled? Yes, they are, but they perhaps haven't updated their address, so they're enrolled at an old address, or in some cases at a different council area. All right, voting process, sadly it's still postal voting only, but the good news is there's a little bit longer for the electors to mark their voting papers and get them back to us. The bad news is NZ Post can take longer to deliver them. So historically they had 5 days to do that, 5 working days. That's been extended to 10, and we think in some cases it will take up to 10 days to get those voting packs out to some. So as candidates, if you're thinking about that, just be mindful that the delivery process is probably going to take a smidge longer this time round. In the township area, in Timaru, for instance, probably won't be noticeable, but some of the rural areas, perhaps it will be. But the thing for you guys to note is that those voting packs start going out from the 9th of September. So if you're thinking about organising your campaigning, that's probably the date you want to start, or make sure that you've got your campaign material out and about by. If somebody doesn't receive their voting doc, then they can apply for a special vote. They need to do that through one of the council offices. And they can do that by either coming in here or one of the service areas, or ringing up if there's enough time and getting one mailed out. The closer you get to that 11th of October date, the more likely it is they're going to have to come in here and do it. So if you hear of people that haven't received voter packs, get them to ring or come in and ask for a special vote. Special vote is pretty much the same process as the ordinary voters, except they have to fill in a declaration saying they haven't already voted. It's a little bit more paperwork.
That can be done at Temuka and Geraldine, as well as Timaru, so the library there.
Just be mindful that as candidates you shouldn't be collecting voting documents. There's no hard and fast law to say you can't, but you shouldn't, just from a perception point of view. Ideally you just want them to mark their voting paper and either they deliver it to the post bin or into the council office, or they get somebody else that can do that for them. Ideally just not you guys. Election results. Okay, so we give you 3 flavours of results. So this is the bit that most people are interested in. On the Saturday afternoon, so this is the 12th, we'll give a progress result by about 2 o'clock. And that'll be about 90% of the votes that we expect to process will be included in that result. What won't be included is any votes that are still in the orange wheelie bins that haven't been cleared at that point, and any votes that have been dropped off here to the council office. So that's where the 90%, everything else will have been processed at that stage, so it will be a reasonably firm result, but just be mindful that it can still change.
Can I ask one clarifying? Stuff that's in the mail has been posted that doesn't reach you by then doesn't count, does it?
Mm-hmm. Correct. So anybody that's mailed something on the Friday night probably won't get counted. So again, if you're talking to electors, encourage them to vote it or mark it, their voting paper, and get it in the mail as soon as possible. There will be clearances on the Friday that will get to us, but somebody sticking it in after about 4 or 5 o'clock is probably too optimistic. So those progress results will come out. Do you guys ring them in this case? Yep, so they will ring the candidates in the first instance. They'll try to anyway, and then follow it up with an email. Once we've got the voting, those orange bin votes and those remaining votes that have been dropped off here, so we'll get those late Saturday afternoon in Christchurch. They'll be processed on Sunday, and once those have been processed and reconciled, we release a preliminary result. So that's a firmer result. It's got all the ordinary voting documents in there, but it hasn't got the special votes. There won't be a lot of special votes by comparison, but again, just keep in mind that even that preliminary result may still change if it's a particularly close result in a certain issue. And that final result will come out on about the 16th of October, so that's about the Thursday. The slow part is waiting on the Electoral Commission to give us details of these newly enrolled electors, basically. So we have to go back to the Electoral Commission and say, are these guys actually enrolled? Can we count their votes? And when we get that authorisation from them, we just pick them up and include them. So that final result will be, in theory, on the Thursday. There's a smidge of a chance that it might be a wee bit before that, but don't hold your breath. And then that's when we declare who has actually been elected. And at that point, then there's an opportunity for a recount and other things can happen beyond that. But for all intents and purposes, that's the final result that we will release, and the council then takes over from there and starts the coming into office process. So this is where it's a bit of you're in no man's land effectively. So that we will declare the candidates that are elected on that Thursday or thereabouts, but you can't do anything until you are sworn in. So you'll come into office officially the day after that public notice hits the council's website. So if we release that on the Thursday, those that are elected come into office on the Friday. Those that are going out of office, that's when they exit officially. So there's a replacement process there, but you as elected members can't do anything until you do this declaration, which is handled through that swearing-in ceremony. And as council will contact the successful candidates and tell you what day that is. It's probably in the candidate handbook, I suspect, the interim date, but subject to change.
It's the 28th of October.
20th of October, okay. Resources, so I'm not going to go through all those. Those are what we indicated before. There, if you particularly want to structure your campaign side of things to avoid personal details being released, and some of those are council resource items. The best resource I can give you is to read the candidate handbook. It's quite detailed and has more information on all these relevant parts that we're covering off tonight. And that's just about it from me. So I'm just going to reiterate those relevant, pertinent points. And note that if you are standing, I'm just going to wish you best luck. But come back to us if you've got any queries about what you have or may have seen in the presentation tonight or hear of during the course of the process. If you've got questions, let's open the floor now and cover off anything that anybody here might have. Yeah.
What would you say as councillor?
I can do that one. No, that's fine. So, I mean, being a councillor can be as active as you want or not active as you want. A typical council day will be a Tuesday once a month. You'll have had your agenda pack the week before, so you'll be pouring through lots of documents. The meetings usually kick off about 2 o'clock and end at 5. Sit around the table, you'll discuss with your colleagues, you'll probably vote on some items. Outside of that, it's depending on how actively you want to engage with your community. There's no rules about being a councillor with that regard. You can be as active as you want. A lot of you being voted in as a council the second time round probably does depend on you being available and known by the community and listening to them. But I mean, the only sort of legal restrictions, you have to come in with an open mind and no pre-decision about what you're voting on in any given day, and that's it really. But you can be as active or as inactive as you like. Round about those important statutory times like the long-term plan and the annual plan, we do go out to the public to ask their opinion on things. So again, it's not necessary, but actually getting out and listening to people and hearing what the views of the community are do really inform you when you come to make the decision. But at the end of the day, you're around this table making decisions on behalf of the community that put you here, so it all rests on your shoulders. One of the positive things is, like any job, you do get an induction where we do step you through all these things in lots more detail than I was available to tonight. And again, the staff are here to answer your questions. They're all subject matter experts in what they do, but they do want to bring you along for it and answer any questions you might have, because at the end of the day, sort of good quality decision making makes their jobs easier.
I think also going forward, more emphasis on
I'll just add one thing as well, if we want to look at the council.
That will be in the handbook. If you, when you see it, when it comes out, you'll see that in there. But effectively, it's a global declaration that you are advocating on behalf of the district, not just the ward or the community board or the area that you have been elected to. And it's
Okay, so just to clarify, it doesn't include obedience to central government directives regardless of someone's.
We're legislatively bound organisations, so local councils are structured based on the Local Government Act. Their decision-making itself is on areas which are featured in our delegation. If there are areas outside of our delegation that are decided on by a different body, legislative, we have to follow that, if that makes any sense. It doesn't change. We do a representation review every 3 years, and we'll usually change the boundaries, but we've not changed it in the last 3, I think. Timaru Ward is basically Timaru to State Highway 8 down to Pariora, and then Pleasant Point Timuka runs from there, and is Pleasant Point in Timuka, and then Orari inwards up to Mesopotamia's Geraldine. That's pretty rough, but that's,
Yep.
yep.
And there's a map on the election website that breaks all that down. Search your address and zoom out.
They're designed so that every ward seat has a similar number of electors per ward. It's not perfect though, due to communities of interest.
The external boundary doesn't typically change. It's just the internal ward boundaries, yeah.
Yep, Rangitata to Pariora is generally the district boundary.
Just one point I wanted to make more obvious. When you submit a nomination, basically what will happen from there is that your details will be then listed on the council website under their confirmed candidate, under a block within the election page, effectively. So within 24 hours, 24 working hours, we try and process those nominations, ideally earlier than that. But if you submit a nomination, just keep in mind that the next item that you should be looking for is your name listed on that, because it should pop up there within 24 hours of you submitting that nomination form. If it's not, then come back to us. Maybe that it's either got a problem with the processing or we haven't received it if it's been emailed to us. And you've used the wrong email address, might be in Netherland. So just keep an eye out for that. And then what we are doing this year, this time round, is sending to the candidates a proof, and it's a rough proof of your profile that's going to appear in that booklet. So in the past that hasn't happened, but what we're trying to do is just give you a high level, this is the photo that we think has been submitted for you, this is your name as we think we've read it off your nomination form, this is the affiliation that we're going to list for you, are those details right? And then beyond that, is that the profile that you sent in? Now we may actually go and change the profile content if there's something in there that's particularly confusing or something, we have to come back to you. But it's just to give you that initial peace of mind that what we're about to print for you is actually what you submitted. So those are the two things to look out for.
Yep, we'll make those available in the libraries upstairs. It's also basically from as soon as possible. We're just organising that right now. And also it's available at timaru.gov.nz/elections.
Anything else that springs to mind? All right, well, look, again, thanks for coming along. Well done for coming out on a Monday night, again. But if you have anything else that you want to raise with us, either come back through Stephen or Brendan or myself, and we can hopefully give you answers that you want.
Yep.
And good luck if you're looking to continue.
Don't leave your nomination to the last minute, because...
Yeah.
Yep.